Welcome to our video presentation about modernizing the X3D terrain for the STOQS project. This semester, we work with our mentor, Mike McCann. Mike is a lead software engineer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, otherwise known as MBARI. The purpose of MBARI is to provide advanced research in ocean science and technology. An example of MBARI's research and development is the STOQS project. STOQS is an open source software that helps visualize large data collections. The core motivation for our project is to make the current pipeline more efficient and user-friendly. The current pipeline is complex and relies upon manually inputting lines of code, which is not efficient and prone to user error. It's important for field researchers to be able to easily visualize the data that's collected. There currently exists endless amounts of data that has been collected by MBARI. By improving the pipeline, it should allow for a faster turnaround time from collection to visualization. The data that is collected has the potential to make a direct impact. For example, there's a potential for this data to be used for studying things like global warming and to provide a better understanding of sea life. The data can also influence legislation, for example, protecting fisheries or endangered species. STOQS currently has an outdated pipeline. It currently uses a shape resource container, SRC, which is inefficient and outdated. SRC requires many HTML requests for binary files. Therefore, our objective is to revamp the current pipeline by cutting down on the amount of steps needed for rendering 3D data. We also want to automate steps, which currently require manual user input, and finally, make use of newer formats such as GLTF. GLTF will allow for new features to be used for 3D rendering and will only require a single HTML request, thereby allowing for greater efficiency. The path to achieving our objective is by taking our collected data and converting it to a .obj format. This format will allow us to be one step away from achieving GLTF. Currently, the pipeline starts with a .grd or grid file. That file is then converted with the use of a GMT command, which produces a .asc file. The output is Earth-centered, Earth-fixed coordinates. Then, the use of MeshLab allows the user to construct a surface and compute normals or vectors. During this process, filters are also applied, which clean up the visual appearance. It's then saved as a Stanford.ply file. Finally, the user uses Instant Reality's AOPT tool, which allows for generation of an SRC container. There currently exists no streamlined way to make the pipeline more efficient. Our mentor reached out to numerous experts in the field, but there's no best practices for converting from .grd to GLTF. There are resources from going .obj to GLTF, which led our focus to shift to converting from .grd to .obj. Unfortunately, this was a difficult problem to solve. We tried numerous GMT modules. We tried to create a custom program, and Sean can expand upon these approaches.
Thank you, Edward. Any pipeline that converts our data to OBJ would have to start with MapProject, a tool from the GMT package. The MapProject tool from GMT takes a GRD file and projects it onto an Earth-centered Cartesian space as a point cloud. This format is a great starting place for transitioning to better graphics formats, but not without the help of using GUI applications like MeshLab. With MeshLab, one can perform a series of operations on a point cloud like this and export the result as an OBJ file. The problem with this is that is a manual process, and our whole goal is to automate that. Despite that, the point cloud produced by MapProject is a necessary starting point, as data in units of longitudinal, latitudinal degrees are not compatible with computer graphics. We were instructed to investigate the GMT tool mbgrd to OBJ in the hope that it would automate the MeshLab portion of our pipeline. We discovered that it did not work well with our original GRD data file. There's little to no documentation for this tool, so it's difficult to know exactly what went wrong. We suspected that NaN values, or not a number values, in our data file were causing the problem, but we eliminated that possibility by imputing them with a valid value. It occurred to us that the data we ran mbgrd to OBJ against had not been projected into a Cartesian space, and we suspected that that might have been the problem. However, there's no clear way to project our data into a Cartesian space and convert it back to a GRD format in a way that makes sense. Inherent in the GRD format is the notion of coordinates being in degrees. After talking to our mentor about this problem, we decided that the issue with MB GRD to OBJ is likely a problem with mismatching units. Had we decided to project our data into a Cartesian space and then convert it back to a GRD format, we would have used these tools, XYZ to GRD and GRD to XYZ. GRD to XYZ puts the data into a table that MapProject can read. XYZ to GRD takes as input a table of latitude, longitude, elevation in ASCII characters and encodes it back into a GRD, the inverse of the former. There's no straightforward way to use XYZ to GRD to convert our projected point cloud into a GRD file. One of its required arguments is the region in units of latitudinal and longitudinal degrees over which the data spans. In a Cartesian space, there is no notion of north, south, east, or west. The z values in the projected data are not elevations, unlike the z values in the .grd data, which do represent elevations. The z values in our point cloud represent distance along the axis of Earth's poles from the center of the Earth. This is all to say that as far as we can tell, there is no straightforward way of using projected data in a Cartesian space with MBGRD to OBJ, a program that expects its data to be in a GRD format. There's simply no way to use it without garbling the data. Another tool we investigated is called GRD Project from the GMT package. The documentation on GRD Project is very sparse. We had hoped it might be able to project our original GRD data into a format more compatible with MBGRD to OBJ, but we could not get enough information on it to be able to really use it effectively. And we also suspect it's more designed for two-dimensional maps rather than three-dimensional surfaces based on the limited documentation we could find. Creating an OBJ file from a point cloud procedurally in code was certainly a possibility. In say a Python script that just manually converts GRD data to, manually converts point cloud data to an OBJ format in say a Python script. And we actually did this. We wrote a script that iterated through all the points in our point cloud and constructed squares between them. Normally you would use triangles, but our data is very dense, and using squares reduced the number of polygons we needed to use, and it made the code more simple. This approach is something we would actually recommend to someone trying to do something similar, but there are complications. First of all, there are too much data for every data point to be used. Some sampling would have to be done. The OBJ file we ended up with was unwieldy large. Normal vectors for each point would need to be calculated, and other MeshLab operations like Laplacian smoothing would need to be custom implemented. But because the shape of the Monterey Bay does not fold in on itself, creating polygons between the points, we believe should be fairly straightforward. We had a breakthrough with a command line tool that bundles with MeshLab called MeshLab Server. MeshLab Server is a wrapper around all the core functionality of MeshLab and allows users to automate MeshLab operations on the command line. It uses a script in an XML-like format to list out mesh filters and their arguments. We were able to use this tool to convert our point cloud data to a fully processed and filtered OBJ file. There are small issues with this solution. Because we cannot find the version of MeshLab used originally, there is still some work to be done making sure that the operations defined in the automated script mirror the exact operations done in the original STOQS terrain generation pipeline. But this is actually a really trivial problem, and we are very happy that we successfully completed this major portion of the pipeline. That's all we have for you. Thank you guys for watching our presentation, and special thanks to Mike McCann